In a remote town lived two terrifying butchers who specialized in slaughtering passing tourists. They tortured living beings with various brutal methods, injecting sedatives to keep them conscious yet immobilized. Finally, they poured scalding wax over the individuals, creating lifelike wax figures. What's more terrifying is that the people inside the wax figures remained alive. When the wax was peeled off, the skin had been cooked by the hot wax, leaving only raw flesh. It is said that the butchers were so twisted because they were conjoined twins from birth, with the back of one brother's head connected to the other's face. Although they were successfully separated through surgery, the brothers were psychologically warped thereafter. They developed a liking for murder and turning people into wax figures. Despite this, there were still daring college students willing to venture into the area. That night, they set up tents in the wilderness, enjoying each other's company. Suddenly, a pickup truck shattered the pleasant atmosphere, its headlights shining directly on the campsite. They asked the driver to move the vehicle, but the driver remained unmoved. It was only when Nick threw a beer bottle, smashing one of the truck's headlights, that the driver departed. However, in the deep of night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Paige heard a noise and went outside to investigate, finding nothing amiss. However, early the next morning, their car began emitting white smoke. Upon inspection, they found that the engine belt had snapped. On the other side, Paige and Julie were about to go to the restroom when suddenly Julie slipped and fell into a foul-smelling pit. Seeing a severed arm in front of her, Paige screamed loudly in terror. Her companion heard the sound and immediately rushed to pull her out. At that moment, a pickup truck pulled up, and the driver threw a deer carcass inside. The driver promptly pulled out the severed arm, explaining that it was just a wax figure's hand, which reassured everyone. Upon learning about their car trouble, the driver kindly offered to take them to buy new parts. So, Paige and her boyfriend headed to the town together. On the way, the driver's gaze stayed fixed on Paige. Upon arriving in the town, they found the entire street deserted, with even the gas station lacking any staff. So, the two decided to go to the church to ask for help, quickly leaving when they accidentally stumbled upon a funeral scene. At that moment, a well-dressed man emerged. It was Dalton, the gas station owner. He informed the two that he was going to fetch tool parts and would be back in half an hour. So the two of them arrived at the wax museum in the town to wait and explore. They discovered that each wax figure here was incredibly lifelike. Unlike usual wax museums featuring celebrities, this one showcased ordinary, unknown individuals. Little did they know, these figures were actually made using town residents. While Paige was looking at herself in a mirror, she suddenly noticed someone outside the window. She asked her boyfriend to go check, but after searching around, he found nothing. Suddenly, Paige accidentally knocked over a wax figure, startling her and prompting her to quickly leave. Feeling uneasy about the place, the two decided to head straight to the gas station to get tools and prepare to leave. Dalton appeared behind them again, mentioning that he had matching parts at home. So, the boyfriend went to Dalton's house while Paige waited outside. The boyfriend found Dalton's home incredibly eerie, but instead of being scared, he was intrigued and explored around. Outside, Paige grew anxious while waiting by the car. Suddenly, she realized that Dalton's car was the same one that had antagonized them the previous night. Paige immediately hunted to alert her boyfriend inside the house. Before he could react, the power went out in the house. In the darkness, a masked butcher slowly approached him, snipping his Achilles tendon with scissors. Outside, Paige saw Dalton coming and immediately walked to the car to lock the doors. At this point, Dalton dropped his disguise and smashed the car window. In her desperation, Paige started the car. Dalton was thrown out, but one of the car's wheels was also incapacitated. Paige could only escape through the rear window, then ran towards the town without looking back. She aimed to seek help where there were more people, but the town remained deserted. Thinking of the church where there were people during the day, she headed there. However, the church was filled with wax figures, each one incredibly lifelike. Accidentally knocking off a wax figure's arm, she was shocked to find flesh and blood inside. At that moment, Dalton entered, prompting Paige to hide in a coffin. When Dalton wasn't paying attention, she escaped from the church. Unfortunately, she couldn't outrun the strong Dalton and was ultimately captured. Dalton tied her to a chair, sealing her lips with glue. Meanwhile, her boyfriend was sedated and then had glue applied to his face by the butcher. A cloth was placed over his face. The butcher then secured him in place. As the switch was activated, scalding wax gushed out, covering him entirely, thus creating a realistic wax figure. Meanwhile, Their friend Nick from the camp also arrived in the town. Seeing the town devoid of people, the two split up to search. At the gas station, Nick encountered Dalton and asked where he could buy car parts. In the basement, Paige heard Nick's voice and struggled to break free from her restraints. She reached out through the sewer to try to get her companion's attention. Craftily, Dalton pretended to tie his shoelaces, blocking the view, and then proceeded to cut off Paige's fingers. Just as Dalton was about to harm Nick further, Paige, disregarding the pain, tore off the glue and shouted with all her might. As a result, Dalton was locked outside the gas station, and Nick immediately rushed to the basement to rescue Paige. Meanwhile, their other companion somehow wandered to the wax museum. There, he found Paige's boyfriend sitting motionless, not moving a muscle. He reached out to touch the other's cheek, only for the wax and skin to peel off together, leaving him unable to move and shedding tears of agony. Suddenly, the butcher appeared from behind and, leaving behind just a head, dragged the body away. On the other side, Julie and her boyfriend were at the campsite, about to rest. However, a commotion outside startled her boyfriend, who went to investigate. Inside the tent, Julie was just about to sleep when she sensed someone watching her. She turned on the light. Terrified, Julie sought refuge in an abandoned building, but the floor grates kept shooting out knives, injuring her as she hid behind a car. The butcher found her too, and just as Julie peeked out to look, that's how Julie met a tragic end under the butcher's iron rod. On the other side, Nick and Paige, to defend themselves, smashed the store's glass and retrieved a crossbow from a wax figure. Dalton chased after them, and the two took refuge in a cinema. The audience here was also made up of wax figures. Paige then disguised herself as a wax figure, while Nick lay in ambush nearby. After successfully hitting Dalton, the two immediately fled. When Dalton emerged in pursuit, Nick released another arrow. Nick picked up Dalton's hunting rifle to reload it, only to find it empty. With no other choice, the two decided to go to Dalton's house to find a phone and call for help. At that moment, someone entered the room. It was the injured Dalton. In pain, Dalton was tending to his wounds in the kitchen, completely unaware of the two. The sound of an engine outside signaled the butcher's return with Julie's body. The two immediately hid in the basement and, after passing through a long corridor, found it filled with wax and an unfinished wax figure. With a gentle touch, the head unexpectedly came off, leading Nick to feel a deep sense of guilt. Suddenly, the butcher appeared from behind, and the two engaged in a struggle, accidentally triggering a mechanism. A pot of scalding hot oil with flames spilled onto the floor. The entire basement erupted in flames. Seizing the opportunity, the two escaped amidst the chaos. They realized the basement was directly beneath the wax museum and saw Julie's boyfriend with half of his face missing. Upon opening the door, they found Dalton had been waiting for them all along. The fight between the two intensified, with the basement fire reaching the wax figures. The melted wax figures revealed decaying skin, and Nick seized the opportunity to knock Dalton to the ground. Paige, by his side, frantically struck with a stick until Dalton's face was a bloody mess before stopping. At this moment, the butcher, witnessing his brother being beaten to death, went on a crazed pursuit of Paige. Paige sought refuge in a second-floor room, only to discover the entire house was made of candles. With a single strike, the butcher pierced through the wall and entered. Luckily, Nick arrived in time, tackling the butcher onto the bed. In the scuffle, Nick removed the butcher's mask, revealing a horrifying visage that further fueled the butcher's rage. Armed with a knife, the butcher lunged to kill Nick. In a critical moment, Paige stabbed the butcher from behind. As the fire grew larger, the entire house was on the brink of melting. Wax oil kept flowing down the stairs, forcing the two into a corner. They had no choice but to dig through the wall continuously, eventually creating a large hole to escape through. With the house melting and collapsing, they managed to flee just before it came crashing down. Everything in the wax museum would soon blend in as the candles melted away. The next day, the police finally arrived, discovering that over 70 people in the town had died. Nick and Paige, who had survived, left in an ambulance. However, on the way, they saw the man who had beckoned them to the town that day waving at them.